Hi, I'm Ethan, and this is going to be the fourth part of my 10-part Unity tutorial series. Now, in the last video, I covered how to make textures and put them onto 2D sprites in your environment. So in this case, I downloaded a stone material, and then I ran it through a shader graph, and then I put it on my circle, which is going to be our boulder. And then I did the exact same for a dirt texture that I made. So if you don't know what a shader graph is, or if you missed the last video, a shader graph is basically something that looks like this, where you take your textures and then you do things to them. Like, say, you multiply their values, or you change their values somehow, and then transfer that and turn that into a final product, which is going to be your desired texture. So in this video, since I've already covered that, I'm not going to be explaining that anymore. But in this video, I'm going to show you another way to get sprites into your scene that have a texture. So to start with, we're going to want to start making props for our box to start running into. So I already downloaded a box texture from a website called opengameart.org. So I'm going to open my folder, which is, let's see, in my materials folder, and then go to sprites and textures. So in my sprites and textures folder, I have my circle, dirt block, RTS crate, square, and stone. So in this case, I've already used and covered the circles, the dirt blocks, the stone before, so I don't think those are worth mentioning. But something new that I've downloaded is the crate. So I'm just going to drag this out into our scene. So the first, you'll probably notice two things at first. One, it's gigantic. If I drag it into our camera view where we can see it, and then click the game view, it's a really sizable portion of our screen. So we're gonna want to size that down. And another really obvious thing to notice is that it's completely pitch black. And this is because we added a render pipeline, among other things like shaders, to our camera, our main camera. So this means that sprites will need to be lit, or they'll have to have some sort of unlit by default. So basically that means if your sprites are lit, that means they will require a light source. And in this case, we don't want that yet. That's a bit out of the scope of this project right now. So for now, I'm going to click on RTS crate, and I'm going to make it so that it doesn't look pitch black. Because you'll notice that it doesn't have the crate texture that we want it to have. So I'm going to go into the inspector. Under sprite render, there should be a property that says material. So I'm going to click this right here, and then you'll see a bunch of stuff here, and the one that I'm going to choose is sprite unlit default. So this means that it's not going to need lighting to make the texture show up. So now we have this crate, but it's not really doing anything because it doesn't have the physics components. So let's add those now. As always, rigid body 2D, since this is 2D, we're going to want it to be dynamic because we want it to be affected by other objects and gravity. And I'm going to add another component, which is going to be the box collider, which is going to allow it to collide with other physics objects. And it's going to determine where it's going to collide. So now we have this, but it's still a bit too large. So I'm going to change the scale up here down to, let's say, 0.2 in all axes. So now this is a much better size that we can work with. So if we click play, our box is just going to slide down the hill. So that's not the desired behavior that we want. We want there to be some sort of landing for our hill. But another thing is that we probably want more boxes. It's going to be boring if our boulder is rolling down this hill and only hitting one box. That's not very eventful. So we want to copy and paste this box to make more props for our boulder to hit. So we could just select it in the hierarchy or in the scene, and then I'm going to Control D. So now you're not going to see it immediately, but if I drag the clone out of the way, you'll see that I just made 2 crits. Yeah. So I pressed F to focus in on it. That's just a little tip. You can press F to focus on objects in the scene. Now, I could do that, but let's say I want to change, let's say 15 boxes all at once, because because they all have, let's say a property that I want changed, like say their mass. If I want all of the masses of my crates to be changed from 1 to 1.5, I'm going to need to manually go through all of them or select all of them and change it like that. And that's kind of inconvenient, especially if your hierarchy is a bit of a mess. So I'm going to delete this clone and I'm going to do something better. I'm going to go back into assets and I'm going to select our crate. I'm going to drag our crate by holding left click on it from our hierarchy into our project window. And this is going to create what's called a prefab. So a prefab is basically the blueprint, the template for all clones of this prefab in the scene. So it's better for me to explain it by example. Let's say I want 7 of these crates to be in the map. I can just drag it straight from the project window, just into the map, like that. And when you look at them on the hierarchy, you'll notice that they're blue. The fact that they're blue, like their name is blue, this means that they're prefabs. So now, let's say I want to change the linear drag of all of these boxes to 1. I could do this, select all of them, and then do that. Or, instead of doing that, I could just select my prefab, go into the inspector window. I'm going to select my prefab in the project window, go into the inspector window, and then change the linear drag to 1. And then if I select any of these, all of their linear drags have been changed to 1. So this is extremely convenient for any time you have a lot of things of the same type. Say you have a lot of ground objects. That's part of your scene, and you want to change all of them at once for some reason. And so in our case, we want a lot of crates in the scene, and we want to be able to change all of them all at once. So a prefab is exactly the way to go. And just to reiterate, to create a prefab, drag something in your hierarchy by holding left click and dragging it into your project window, and it'll create a prefab. And from there, you can select the prefab in your project window and then drag it into the scene view, like this. So we don't want this many boxes, that's a bit excessive. So I'm going to delete some of them. I'm also going to organize this a little bit. So I'm going to right click in the hierarchy. I'm going to click create empty. So now an empty game object basically means there is nothing that the game object has except for a position and rotation. So I'm going to name this crates. This is not going to be a prefab. This is just going to be an easy way to contain all of our crates. So let's say we don't want our hierarchy to be inundated with 20 or 50 crates, because you can see how after 20 crates, it's going to really fill it up unnecessarily. So by putting them into an empty game object, you can organize them. So now I can click this arrow next to crates, or to the left of crates, and then minimize it. So now our hierarchy looks a lot neater now. And while we're at it, I'm going to select our circle, and then I'm going to rename it to boulder, just for simplicity and clarity. And I'm going to take our square, I'm going to rename it to ground. So now if we click play, all of our boxes and our boulder is falling down the hill. But we want our camera to follow the boulder as it's traveling down the hill. Because otherwise, if we run it again, it's everything's just gonna fall out of frame of the camera. So to do this, you can install a really handy package in Unity. So similar to the way we downloaded the universal render pipelines in the last video, we're going to install a really handy package called Cinemachine. So what Cinemachine does is it allows you to automatically move your camera and make your camera track things on screen in a really easy way without you barely need to code at all. So I'm going to select Window. I'm going to go to Package Manager. Sorry. And again, make sure that you have Unity Registry selected up top. And I'm going to search Cinema. And the name of it is Cinemachine. Not Cinema Machine, it's Cinemachine. It's one word. So down here, just click Install. Yeah, so it's going to take a little while. So now we have Cinemachine installed. And if you look up here, there's a new tab called Cinemachine. So the first thing you want to do is click on it. You'll see that you can create a bunch of different cameras. In this case, we're just going to want a 2D camera. So now you'll see that there's a new game object in the hierarchy. And what we want to do is make sure that selected CMVCam1. And then if you look in the inspector, you'll see a property called follow. So this is going to be the object that our camera is going to follow now. And we want our camera to follow our boulder. So drag the boulder from the hierarchy into the follow property. And now our camera has snapped to a position where the boulder, which it's following, is going to be at the center. So now if I click play, I need to deselect VCam. Right, if I click play again, without the overlay, our camera is now following our boulder. And everything's just falling off because we haven't actually extended the map yet. So now, our camera is going to follow our boulder anywhere it goes. So the next thing we want to do is, we don't really want our boxes to just be falling along with the boulder. We want our boulder to run into it. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to turn the ground into a prefab. So I'm going to drag the ground into here. Now we have this. And I'm going to drag it back out into the scene view. Now we want it to be straight. We want it to be like a landing. So like a landing of a stairwell. So I'm going to select our rotation in the z-axis. When you're in 2D, the rotations are in the z-axis. I'm going to change it from negative 49 degrees to 0 degrees. So now it's going to be straight. I'm going to move it up like this so that it approximately aligns with it. It's not going to look super great, but it's good enough for our purposes. And now I can take all of our crates and move them. Take all of our crates and then move them to over here. So I'm going to organize them a little bit better. I'm using the move tool. Earlier I was using the rect tool. I moved to using the move tool. The move tool is better for precise movement of your objects. So now if I click play, we're running into some boxes. That's great. Now, our boulder is really coming to a complete stop when it runs into the boxes. So we don't really want that. We want our boulder to really smash its way through. So I'm going to change the mass of our boulder. Now, when we change the mass of our boulder to increase it, it's going to give it even more inertia and even more momentum to be able to hit other objects and lose less speed. And while we're at it, I'm going to select our prefab and change the mass of our crate to go from 1 to 0.5. So now these changes should should be present in every single crate now. And if we click through them, yeah, it's all good. So now I'm going to click play again, and our boulder should hopefully just hit right through them. Yeah, so now you can see that the boulder is having a much easier time hitting the boxes and pushing them out of the way. Now, one last thing I'm going to cover is we don't want our landing to be this short. This is not a very big game map, and we're going to be falling off the edge really soon. So something that you're going to be doing in a lot of games where you have to make maps like this is that you're going to be tiling your textures. Now, this basically means that your texture is going to repeat itself as you drag it out. So just to explain and show what I'm talking about, I'm going to select our ground, so this landing right here. I'm going to go to draw mode, I'm going to click it, I'm going to go from simple to tile. And now I'm going to drag our ground. And now you'll notice two things again. Our box collider, our green outline over here, is not really adjusting to the size of it. And to do that, all we have to do is go into our box collider and select auto tiling. And now our box collider is all good. And another thing is that our texture, normally it would stretch. If I change this back to simple, our texture is very stretched, and that's undesirable. It looks really bad. That's why we want to go to tile. Our texture repeats itself instead of just stretching in whatever direction you choose. So now I'm going to do the same for our other ground object, change the draw mode from simple to tile, and then make it so that the box collider auto tiles. So it stretches with the scaling of our box. So I'm going to change this to go up a little bit. I'm going to move our boulder. Now, when we move our boulder, our camera is going to follow it because, well, the Cinemachine camera is designed to follow it. So now I'm going to click play, and this should be the start of our game. Yep. So our boulder rolls down the hill, gains speed, and then smashes into the boxes. Now in the next video, I'm going to be covering some code that's going to make our boxes disappear and even spawn particle effects to give it much more impact. But that's all for now. So thanks for watching.